Okay, so you want to own a gas station. You drive past one every single day, prices glowing on that big bright sign, cars lined up at every pump, hundreds of gallons flowing through the hoses every single hour. You do the math in your head, $3 a gallon with 10 pumps running non-stop, and you think, this place has to be printing money. I want a piece of that. That is the picture in your head right now, and I need you to hold on to it for one more minute, because the real financial story behind a gas station is stranger and far more fragile than anything happening at the pump, and almost nobody tells you that the fuel itself is actually the smallest part of how this business survives. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why a gas station can be pumping hundreds of gallons an hour and still be losing money, and why the owners who quietly get rich off these properties barely think about gasoline at all. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button, because this channel breaks down the real economics behind the businesses everyone assumes are simple, and this one is genuinely one of the strangest. Let's start with what it actually costs to get into this, because this is the first place the fantasy and the reality collide. Buying an existing station, land, building, pumps, and underground tanks all included, typically runs anywhere from $500,000 to several million, depending on location and volume. Building one from scratch is a different world entirely, because land alone in a busy suburban corridor can cost $500,000 to $2 million. Construction of the building and canopy adds another $1 to $3 million, and installing the underground storage tanks themselves, the steel or fiberglass tanks that legally have to be double-walled with leak sensors built into the space between the walls, runs another $300,000 to $750,000 once you factor in the required environmental containment systems. Add commercial kitchen and cooler equipment inside the store, permits and environmental compliance documentation, and a modern ground-up station with a real convenience store can land anywhere between $2 million and $5 million before a single car has ever pulled up to a pump. And here's the detail almost nobody explains going in. You're not just buying pumps and a register, you're buying underground infrastructure that costs more to install than almost anything visible above the ground, which is exactly why banks scrutinize these loans so heavily, requiring independent feasibility studies before they'll even consider financing the deal. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the price of the property is honestly the easy part to understand. The real financial commitment of owning a gas station is not the purchase price, it's a recurring, relentless set of monthly obligations tied to fuel that most first-time buyers completely misjudge, because when the pump reads $3.11 a gallon, people assume a healthy chunk of that flows straight to the owner. It does not. Crude oil alone represents roughly 60% of what you're paying at the pump, about $1.86 of every $3.11, gone before anyone at the station even touches it. Refining adds another 9%, and taxes take another chunk entirely, with the federal government charging a flat 18.4 cents per gallon, and states adding their own tax on top, sometimes pushing combined taxes past 80 cents a gallon in places like California. Distribution and freight take another 11%, and then there are credit card fees, since roughly 85% of fuel purchases are made with plastic, and the payment network takes 1.5% to 3.5% of every swipe. Add it all up, and what the station actually keeps before paying a single employee averages around 30 to 35 cents a gallon in gross margin, and after labor, electricity, and everything else, the real net profit on fuel drops to somewhere between 10 and 15 cents a gallon. If you've subscribed already, thank you. And if you haven't yet, this is genuinely the moment, because what comes next is the part that decides whether a gas station becomes a real business or a very expensive parking lot with a sign on it. Let's talk about the store, because this is the single most misunderstood part of this entire industry, and it changes everything once you actually see the numbers. Fuel sales make up roughly 2/3 of a typical gas station's total revenue, but that same fuel only generates about 38% of total gross profit, while the inside store, coffee, snacks, drinks, lottery tickets, makes up just over 1/3 of revenue, but generates more than 60% of total profit. A can of soda costs the owner roughly 40 cents and sells for $2, a margin over 75%. A cup of brewed coffee costs about 23 cents in beans, cup, and lid, and sells for $3 to $5, a gross margin over 90%. Compare that to a standard 12-gallon fill-up, which after wholesale cost, credit card fees, and operating expenses, nets the station somewhere around 40 to 60 cents total. A single cup of coffee generates more bottom-line profit than pumping 12 gallons of gasoline into someone's car. This is exactly why chains like Wawa and Casey's have spent the last 2 decades building serious food programs inside their stores, because they understood early that the fuel was never really the product, it was the advertisement that got someone to walk through the door. Picture this. You've owned your station for 3 years, fuel volume is steady, and everything looks stable on paper. Then a new competitor opens 2 blocks away and drops their price by 4 cents a gallon. Fuel is one of the most price-transparent products in all of retail. Drivers can read the competing price from their car before they even decide whether to turn in, and a gap as small as 3 to 5 cents is enough to pull the majority of price-sensitive customers away entirely. You're forced to match the price just to keep your pumps running, and suddenly your already thin fuel margin gets even thinner across the entire month, while your fixed costs, staff, electricity, insurance, and property taxes don't move an inch. This exact dynamic is why gas station owners obsess over what the station down the street is charging, because in this business, losing a few pennies a gallon to a nearby competitor isn't a minor inconvenience. It's often the difference between a profitable month and a losing one. This connects to something almost nobody explains to first-time buyers before they sign the deal. Buried underneath every gas station are the underground storage tanks, and this is where the real hidden risk of this entire business actually lives. The EPA requires these tanks to be double-walled with continuous leak monitoring, and even with all that compliance, contamination happens. As of recent EPA data, there have been over 580,000 confirmed releases from underground storage tank systems across the country, with more than 54,000 sites still needing cleanup, and the average cleanup cost per site runs around $154,000, a number that can climb into the millions if the contamination reaches groundwater. And here is the detail that should genuinely worry any first-time buyer. When you buy a gas station, you can be buying the environmental liability that came with it, because contamination from a previous owner's leak becomes your legal responsibility the moment you take ownership of that land, which is exactly why a proper environmental assessment before purchase isn't optional. It's the difference between buying a business and unknowingly buying a hidden 6-figure cleanup bill. Quick reminder, if this is helping you see the numbers more clearly, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep making these breakdowns, and there's a lot more coming on exactly this kind of decision. Now let's put the entire picture together, because this is where the fantasy of easy pump money and the actual financial reality either line up or they don't. Take a mid-sized suburban station pumping 100,000 gallons a month, generating $311,000 in fuel revenue, but only $30,000 in actual fuel gross profit after wholesale costs. Add in a convenience store doing $150,000 a month with a 35% margin, contributing another $52,500 in gross profit, plus a few thousand more from a car wash and ATM commissions, and total combined gross profit lands around $87,000 on $461,000 in total monthly revenue. Subtract staff wages for a 20-person team, credit card processing fees, utilities, maintenance, insurance, and taxes, and you're left with an operating profit around $44,000. Now subtract the monthly loan payment on the property and depreciation on the tanks and equipment, and net operating income lands around $11,000 a month, on $461,000 in monthly revenue, meaning less than 3 cents of every single dollar in sales actually reaches the bottom line. And here's the number that should genuinely change how you see this business. If that store's $52,500 in gross profit simply didn't exist, the fuel alone wouldn't even cover the station's operating expenses, meaning the station would lose money every single month just from pumping gas. The store was never supplementing the business. The store is the business. Here's the part that never shows up in the glossy listing photo of pumps glowing under a bright canopy, and it's worth saying plainly before we close this out. A gas station with hundreds of cars flowing through daily and millions of dollars in annual revenue can produce anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000 in net income for a well-run owner in a genuinely good year, and lose money or barely break even in a bad one, and the difference between those 2 years can be over $150,000, all without a single dramatic event, just a price war, a slow month, or a tank leak triggering an environmental investigation. The operators who actually succeed in this business are never the ones who are best at selling gasoline. They're the ones who understood early that the fuel brings the customer through the door, but the coffee, the sandwich, and the loyalty card are what actually pay the bills. If this video helped you see what's actually happening underneath that glowing price sign, do yourself a favor and subscribe, because we break down the real numbers behind the businesses people assume are simple, and this is exactly the kind of thing nobody tells you before you sign that lease.